Okay, let's dive right in. Have you ever signed up for, say, a new internet service or maybe getting your electricity turned on and you realize you're just blindly clicking agree to this massive, impenetrable wall of text? You know the drill. You can't negotiate. You either accept their terms entirely or you just don't get the service. Period. Today, we're exploring a really fascinating analysis of exactly this everyday scenario, but we're going to look at it through a completely unique lens: classical Islamic jurisprudence.
Here's our quick roadmap for today's explainer. We'll cover the expert, the concept and origins, the four traits of these contracts, classical fiqh, consumer protection, and finally, modern applications. Let's get started.
Section 1. The expert, Dr. Nazif Hamad. We're basing today's explainer entirely on a brilliant, comprehensive study by Dr. Nazif Hamad. He looks closely at what legal scholars call contracts of adhesion. Now, this text is incredibly pivotal because it manages to bridge the gap between ancient Islamic trade concepts and our very modern, everyday corporate realities.
And Dr. Hamad, he is absolutely the right guy to walk us through this. He's a professor of Islamic jurisprudence at Al-Qura University. But here's the thing. He isn't just sitting in an academic ivory tower. As a former Sharia advisor to Al-Raji Banking Corporation and an expert in modern Islamic financial institutions, he's got his feet firmly planted in both theoretical Sharia law and highly practical modern economics.
Moving on to Section 2, Concept and Origins. What actually is a contract of adhesion? So, a crucial point to understand right out of the gate is that the foundational idea of these non-negotiable agreements, it actually comes from outside the Islamic tradition. The concept originated in Western civil law, specifically French law, right around the time we saw the rise of massive utility companies. From there, it was eventually adopted into modern Arab civil codes.
Now here is where Dr. Hamad points out a really fascinating linguistic nuance. The original Western term, when translated, implies adhesion or submission. Those words carry a pretty heavy psychological weight of coercion, don't they? And that clashes slightly with the core Islamic principle of mutual consent. So instead, Dr. Hamad suggests a much better fit. He calls it joining. It's legally and psychologically way more accurate because it recognizes that you, the consumer, are simply joining a pre-existing system rather than being forcefully subjugated by it.
Section 3. The four traits, identifying monopolies. Dr. Hamad outlines a very specific, four-part framework to identify these contracts. Let's walk through them. First, the contract has to be for essential goods or services, things you actually need. Second, the company providing it holds a legal or at least a factual monopoly. Third, the terms are uniform, printed out, and offered to the general public en masse. And fourth, those terms are dictated entirely by the stronger party. There is literally zero room for the weak consumer to negotiate. If a contract hits all four of these marks, you're looking at a contract of adhesion.
Section 4. Classical fiqh, adapting ancient law.
This part brilliantly illustrates just how adaptable Islamic jurisprudence really is. Dr. Hamad points to an old classical concept known as the sale of the constrained. Historically, this described a transaction you made out of pure necessity rather than true free choice. Think of it like having to buy water at a ridiculously high price because you're stranded in a desert. Today, that perfectly connects to modern consumers who just have to agree to a utility company's terms because, well, you can't exactly survive in a modern city without running water or electricity.
Then there's another classical concept, the sale of the monopolist. This deals directly with a seller who holds exclusive control over an essential good and tries to force unfair terms on everyone else. It just goes to show that Islamic law historically recognized and, more importantly, regulated the dangers of market exclusivity way before multinational tech and utility corporations even existed.
But here's a legal twist you might be wondering about. If the consumer has absolutely no power to negotiate, are these contracts even valid? Surprisingly, yes. Despite the massive power imbalance, the contract is initially considered legally valid. In Islamic law, mutual consent can actually be established implicitly through a concept called ma'ata, which basically means giving your consent through the physical action of joining, like simply signing that pre-made printed form to get your Wi-Fi turned on.
Section 5, Consumer Protection, State and Judiciary.
Now don't worry, the consumer isn't left completely defenseless here. This is where the overarching principles of Islamic law step in to shield the weaker party. There's a foundational legal maxim that states harm must be removed.
Dr. Hamad explains that this very principle actually empowers judges to intervene. If a monopoly sneaks in abusive, extortionate, or just deeply unfair clauses into a non-negotiable contract, the judiciary has the absolute right to modify or even completely cancel those specific abusive terms.
And honestly, it goes even further than just waiting for the courts to fix things. When you pit a monopolistic corporation seeking maximum private profit against a public that is desperate for essential utilities, Islamic law clearly prioritizes the public interest. Because of this, Dr. Hamad argues that the state, acting as the guardian of the public, has a proactive duty. They are supposed to oversee and approve these adhesion contracts before they're ever even released to consumers.
Section 6. Modern Applications. Adhesion in Daily Life.
So, where does all this ancient legal theory actually show up in your life today? Pretty much everywhere. Dr. Hamad applies this framework directly to modern necessities. We're talking electricity and water, your telecommunications and internet services, public transportation networks, standard insurance policies, and even exclusive import agencies. So, if there's no real competition for these sectors in your town, these specific Islamic consumer protection laws directly apply to your daily life.
The big, crucial takeaway here is balance. Islamic jurisprudence effectively balances the financial interests of massive monopolies with the fundamental rights of everyday consumers. It acknowledges that yes, the business transaction is legally valid, but it strictly mandates necessary state intervention and judicial oversight to ensure fairness and prevent blatant exploitation. Which brings us to a final thought to wrap up this explainer. We've just seen how centuries-old legal principles map perfectly onto modern utility companies, but think about the future for a second. How can we continue to apply these classical fairness principles to the massive, ever-growing tech monopolies of tomorrow? It's a real puzzle and a question that truly highlights the enduring power and adaptability of this legal framework. Thanks for learning with me today.